Okay, so let's take a few minutes and talk about the importance of the California DREAM Act application, the implication it has for our undocumented students, and all the benefits that it has as well. So let's keep going, and we're going to talk about the California DREAM Act. So first of all, it's important to note that when it comes to supporting our undocumented students, California is truly the leader. So big round of applause for California. We have a lot of available aid for Dreamers in the state of California. So obviously Cal Grant, middle class scholarship, some of these things we have talked about or we will talk about. Chafee Grant, UC University Grant, CSU State University Grant, so that's institutional aid. California Promise Grant, remember we talked, that's formerly the BOG fee waiver. The Student Success Completion Grant, the EOPS. Now, in some work study programs, so work study is typically federally funded, so traditional work study programs are federally funded. So our Dreamers don't qualify for that, at least yet. However, some schools have their own version of a work study program, and they use money coming from a different internal source to pay for that. So some schools do have work study like programs for students. There's also private scholarships, and there's also this very cool thing coming in 2021. So I said there's not really a lot of work study out there for our Dreamers. Beginning in 2021, the Cal Grant B Service Incentive Program will allow students to volunteer their time, and in exchange, they're going to get paid, and it will sort of take the place of the work study program. So it'll be one more thing that the Dreamers can use to get money for school. This is the California DREAM Act application. Now, depending on when you're watching this, you may say, this doesn't look like the one I'm seeing online now. And that's because the California DREAM Act application is going to be revised beginning October 1st, 2019. So this is just general information that we hope you find useful. When all the updates are in place, we'll probably re-record this training, but in the interim, it at least gives you an idea of how the California DREAM application works and who it is for. So this is a screenshot of the California DREAM Act application. Now, you're going to notice that there's a link there that says, hey, check out some additional resources, etc. If you click on that, you can get a lot of resources that would be helpful, not only to your students, but also to you. So one thing that we suggest is that if you work with Dreamers and you assist them in filling out this application, it's a great idea to print out the paper version of the application as a reference, because you're going to find if you're on the phone with a student or the student is describing a problem that they're having with the application, you're going to be able to flip through the paper version and say, oh, I see the question or the questions that you're talking about. It will make life much easier. So there are good resources. And if you click on that link, that's one place to find the paper version as well as several other things. And of course, who can apply? So undocumented students, obviously, you don't have to have DACA. TPS, which is temporary protected status holders, can apply, and U visa holders can also apply. So that's kind of, generally speaking, the group of students who are eligible to apply with this application. It doesn't mean automatically that they're going to qualify, but it means that they have the status that allows them to at least apply. So let's talk about AB 540. You're going to hear AB 540 a lot. I'm just going to bring all this information up so we can see it. AB 540 is not just one law. AB 540 is a collection of laws and Ed Code and Senate bills, and all together, these things form AB 540. So AB 540 wasn't just a switch that was flipped. Okay, now these Dreamers are eligible to apply. Here's the California DREAM Act application. It was a long road. And so what you need to remember just in general about AB 540 is that it is really a combination of a lot of different things that allows these students to, number one, apply for aid, number two, pay in-state tuition, and number three, be able to get financial aid from the state and from the institutions, as well as a number of other places. Now, how do you qualify to be AB 540 eligible? So here's an example of what this looks like. And this has changed recently. It's actually been expanded. So if we look at option A, we notice that this is sort of the more traditional one that you may have heard about in the last 2 or 3 years. You have to have 3 years of California high school credits. Even if you didn't attend for the full 3 years, you have to have 3 years of high school credits. And you have to have 3 years of total attendance in, most normally, the high school. But let's say you have 3 years of high school credits, but you weren't sort of physically there for 3 years. You can make up for that by having attended either an elementary school or a middle school in the state of California. So that's one way you qualify. Now, there's this new, relatively new SB 68, which you may or may not have heard about. And so what SB 68 does is it just it allows for a broader definition of who can be considered AB 540 eligible, because it changed that A requirements that we have listed here, and it includes now you can be a adult school graduate, for example. You can have 3 years partially at a high school and then partially at an adult school. You can be at a community college for 2 years. Let's say you only had 1 year at high school, but then you had 2 years at the community college. So some combination of 3 years of attendance or the equivalent at any of these schools, high school, adult school, or community college for up to 2 years, will also qualify you. So what does that mean? That means, hey, you don't automatically have to have been a California high school graduate in order to qualify for these programs. You don't have to have been necessarily at a California high school for 3 years, right? So it's a little bit of a game changer. It is expanding AB 540 eligibility, and we're going to see this sort of happen more and more as people become aware of the new legislation and more students become eligible to use the new legislation in order to qualify for AB 540. So let's continue to talk about AB 540 requirements. Okay, so the degree or transfer eligibility. So we said graduation from a California high school grade or the equivalent. So if you take an equivalency exam like the GED or the HiSET or the TASC examples, then that would work, okay? If you earn an associate's degree from a California community college, or if you meet the minimum requirements to transfer to a CSU or a UC, that's the degree or transfer eligibility. Remember, previously it was only you had to have graduated from a California high school or have the equivalent credits. That was it. That was the only path you could travel to be AB 540 eligible. But that's changed. So the associate degree at a community college or meeting the minimum requirements to transfer to a CSU or UC, and those two things could kind of go hand in hand, those also will qualify the student. So that part's changed. There's also the non-resident tuition exemption. So students have to file a waiver. Really, it's called an affidavit with the college or university. And really what they're doing with this is that they are saying that they will move forward to legalize their immigration status. Students sometimes freak out about that, or their parents. We need to tell them not to, because frankly, it's not a big deal. It's just a requirement. It's rubber stamped. It's put into a drawer, and it allows a student to qualify to pay non-resident tuition, and also allows them to be certified to be eligible to apply for Cal Grant under the DREAM Act application. So having the affidavit is important. You have to have it, but we don't want students to freak out because they have to get it. It's not that big of a deal. All right, let's take a second and talk about DACA. So DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. We know that DACA continues to be a little bit of a political football. So right now, students can still have DACA, and students can actually still renew DACA. What they can't do is apply for DACA for the first year. So this program, which was started by executive action under President Obama, basically said, hey, these young people that came to the United States when they were babies or toddlers, we're going to give them a measure of protection against deportation. And we're also going to give them these SSNs that are valid for work purposes only. So yeah, it's a social, but it's really used specifically in order to work legally. So, DACA was a program that hundreds of thousands of students took advantage of, and there's still hundreds of thousands who have DACA. So a couple of things you need to understand. It's really important. If a student has DACA, that has zero impact on their ability to apply or not apply with the DREAM Act application, right? You don't have to have DACA. If you have DACA, great, but it's not a requirement. So students will oftentimes confuse DACA with the DREAM Act application. And even though it serves the same group of people, it's not the same thing. So DACA is great. If you're working with students who have DACA and they're able to renew it, you definitely want them to do that. And we're going to see how this plays out with DACA. We still don't know what's going to happen, okay? One thing that's important, students have a social security card. So a lot of times they think because they have this DACA SSN that they're now able to fill out the FAFSA application, right? Can they? No. If you have the DACA SSN, you can only do the DREAM Act application. You cannot do a FAFSA. So it's important to let students know that because that is a very common occurrence. Selective service. So selective service is required of all males between 18 and 25. They have to register in order to get financial aid, and that includes our dreamers. So the hurdle or the additional hurdle that they have is that unlike the FAFSA, on the DREAM Act application, you can no longer register for selective service. So that part was removed, in part to protect the identity of those students. So that part was removed. Now, the good news is, hey, it was done for a good reason. The bad news is, hey, CADA filer, DREAM Act filer, you still have to register for selective service, right? You still have to do it. If you're working at a high school and you're working with these students or an advocacy group or whatever it is you're doing, if you're working with Dreamers, it is mission critical that you have a stack of the forms that they need to register with because they have to mail in those forms. So you can go on to Selective Service and print them out. You can go to the post office and they have a really cool sort of oversized postcard kind of thing that they can use. Whatever it is, you really need to have these available because when you're talking to students, all male students, you need to say, hey, you guys, if you're within a month of your 18th birthday, or you're going to be 18, as you start college, you have to register for selective service, right? That's just the way it is. And, we don't want to single out dreamers, but we do want to say everyone has to do it. If you weren't able to do it on the FAFSA, we have a paper form, or you forgot to do it on the FAFSA, no problem. You can mail in the paper form, or you can go back into your FAFSA. If you did the DREAM Act application, I have the paper form. Here it is, easy to fill out and send in. And you want to do that early because that can take 3 months or more for them to get back the card that says you have successfully registered for selective service. Now, why is that important? That's important because if a DREAM Act student is randomly selected for verification, so a male student, that's one of the things that they're going to be checked for. Did they register for selective service and can they prove it? So you can imagine that if you don't mail this thing in early, it's very likely you're going to show up at that financial aid office at the college and you're going to say, yeah, I did do it, but I didn't get anything back yet. And that can hold up your financial aid. So I'm going to reiterate. So it's important that if you're working with these kiddos and they're going to turn 18 as they start college, shortly before or shortly thereafter, you need to have them fill out this form, right? And you need to tell them you need to wait for the proof and then keep that because that might be something that you need. So when you're filling out the selective service, I referred earlier to the students who have the DACA SSN. They should just leave that blank. They're not required to put a social. You don't need to put a social to register for selective service. So we suggest you just leave it blank and mail it in just like that. Okay, so we work with an organization that does a lot of good work in the Bay Area, but certainly their presence online is important to schools up and down the state of California and outside of California to a degree. So Immigrants Rising was formerly called Educators for Fair Consideration, or E4FC, and they've since rebranded themselves as Immigrants Rising. So I just want to point out that they have a lot of really, really great information on their website. If you are working with undocumented students, I guarantee that you can find 90% of everything that you need to answer a question about financial aid or status or DACA and a whole host of other things. And they also have a lot of really good resources. So my point to you is, if you need help with that cohort, by all means, visit immigrantsrising.org. And if you're in the greater Bay Area, they have a presentation team that will go out to your school, high school or college, or your organization, and they can present and get you caught up on what's going on currently. They're great about updating us on legislation that's impacting our dreamers, just everything. So by all means, if you have the opportunity, check out that information.
Immigrants Rising has really been our school district's one-stop shop for a long time. They've been a collaborative community partner that we go to and we trust.
I've worked with many undocumented students in the 10 years that I've been teaching. It's difficult for students to come out.
It's important to realize that you're serving people from very diverse communities.
We hear all of these bills and legislations that are out there. Students are feeling confused.
It's hard to internalize all of that information, but I know where I can go to look it up.
Immigrants Rising's website, immigrantsrising.org.
What I love about Immigrants Rising is their California Dream Act checklist.
The educational resource binder is
the SB 68 guide.
Scholarship information is always helpful.
The intake service on the website, which helps young people understand their immigration status and what their options are for adjusting that status.
It really helps me be able to point students to whatever they might need.
But also to get the answer myself to then be able to support other students.
Immigrants Rising has been great at growing with and adapting to the climate, to policy changes, and continuing to provide this information for educators.
If there are educators out there who are in schools where maybe there's not a lot of support yet for undocumented students,
We trust Immigrants Rising, we go to them.